Why you must raise the stakes in your novel with every chapter getting to the end. How can you do it? And what happens if you don't? We're going to be addressing those questions and more, and we're starting right now. The problem with most new writers is that their protagonist in their novel is safe. Everything is fine for them. There's no problems for them to have to overcome. There's no difficulties, no obstacles. Everything is safe for the protagonist. The problem is this actually makes for a boring novel. Nobody wants to read a story where the protagonist is safe, because when someone reads your novel, they are putting themselves into your novel. They are the ones who are experiencing the difficulties, the mountains, the trials. And if your protagonist is safe, then the reader feels bored. The more danger you put your protagonist into, the more the reader is going to want to read on, because they feel as though those problems are happening to them. A successful novel is all about one thing: the reader asking themselves, what's going to happen next? It doesn't matter if you're writing a drama, a comedy, a horror, science fiction. It all comes down to that one question: what is going to happen next? This is what compels us to want to turn the page. When the reader stops asking themselves what's going to happen next, they then begin to feel bored. They then want to close the book and walk away. They plan on coming back, but they never do. How many books do you own that you read halfway through and you stopped reading? Chances are it's because you stopped caring about what's going to happen next. Because you did not, the writer did not raise the stakes throughout the novel, did not increase the tension, get the book moving faster, making you fear for the protagonist. What's going to happen to this protagonist? Are they safe? Will everything work out in the end? You, as a writer, you want to make sure that the reader is always asking that question. Remember Mission Impossible? With that great line, it's not Mission Difficult, it's Mission Impossible. You don't want to have a villain who wants to blow up some small town. You want a villain who's going to blow up the world. You don't want someone who's going to rob a bank for a couple of hundred. You want the villain to be robbing the bank of billions of dollars. The more you raise the stakes of what the villain is going to do, the more the person reading is going to ask, what's going to happen next? James Bond did not go after some villain who was wanting to take over some small town. James Bond had to go after some villain who was going to take over the world. And if the villain didn't get what he wanted, he was going to blow up the world. James Bond had to stop that type of an antagonist. When you read a James Bond novel, you can't help but turn the page, because Ian Fleming kept raising the stakes. James Bond had to travel all around the world, collect information, stop bad guys. And you couldn't help but feel the tension, because tension is what sells a novel. When Dan Brown writes a novel, he's not writing about some villain who wants to blow up some small church. The villain wants to blow up the Vatican, while it is filled with people in St. Peter's Square during conclave. This is a huge stakes. The stakes could not get any higher. There is a bomb that's going to go off in 24 hours, and millions of people could end up dying. Talk about raising the stakes. As a writer, when you write a novel, you have to ask yourself, what can I do to truly raise the stakes? Don't have your villain doing something minor. Have them going after something really big with dangerous outcomes. The worse the outcome, the bigger the problems for the protagonist, the more the reader is going to want to turn the page to find out, how is this going to end? Look at Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Nazis were not after something minor. They were after the Ark of the Covenant that would have given them the power to win every war, to take over the earth, and the entire world would be under the Nazis. Indiana Jones was by himself, and he had to stop the entire Nazi army from finding the Ark of the Covenant and taking over the entire world. Now talk about raising the stakes. Imagine if you were in a bookstore and you picked up a book and you looked at the back and started to read the description of what the novel is about. Imagine if the stakes were minor, and if the villain ended up winning, it wouldn't matter. Imagine if some villain wanted to rob a bank of $100. Well, even if the villain were to succeed, no one would really care. But what if a villain wanted to steal all of the gold in the world? Now we've raised the stakes. If you're in a bookstore and you read this on the back of a book, you're going to think, hey, I want to see how this ends. I want to know if this minor protagonist can actually stop this. In the novel Day of the Jackal, we had a character who wanted to assassinate the president of France. And you had one police officer who had to stop him. The Jackal was not an easy character to find. He was the world's greatest assassin. He could kill anybody at any time. Nobody knew what he looked like. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew his real name. But all the police knew was this guy named the Jackal, who was the world's greatest assassin, was going to kill the president of France. So this one police officer had to go after him, stop him, and stop someone from being killed. Now, if the Jackal was just some average guy with a gun, and we knew who he was and where he lived, you wouldn't have any motivation to buy that book. But when you read the back of it, and it talks about the Jackal being the world's greatest assassin, and how one police officer had to stop him, now all of a sudden those stakes have been raised to a level where you want to know what's going to happen. And that is what sells a novel. Always asking yourself, what's going to happen next? Don't make it easy for the protagonist. You don't want your protagonist just walking through the novel, picking up some information here or there, having somebody else find the clues. You want to put your protagonist in the greatest amount of danger, because the villain is after something major, but the protagonist's life is in danger as well. So now you have two things working together. The protagonist has to struggle. They have to be climbing a hill of mud. Don't have them just walking down a sidewalk. Have them climbing a hill and make the hill muddy. Have it raining. Make it difficult. The more difficult the struggle for the protagonist, the greater the reader will want to read on. Because everyone who reads a novel pictures themselves in that novel. They become the protagonist. So when things are difficult for the protagonist, when the world is against them, when they have to do it all on their own, when the obstacles are massive, that is going to make the reader feel as though those obstacles are in front of them. They will want to read on to see how they will solve the problem up against this unstoppable villain. The more you raise the stakes for the protagonist and the antagonist, for both characters, the more the reader is going to want to read on to find out what is going to happen next. You want your story to feel like a roller coaster. Have you ever been on a roller coaster that goes up and down very little? Chances are no, because no one wants to ride a roller coaster like that. That's very minor. You want to go on the biggest, wildest, fastest roller coaster, the one that drops you down, spins you around, and you don't know if you're coming or going left or right because it's so fast. Everyone's screaming, everyone's having a fun time, laughing. Those are the roller coasters that people want to go on. Your novel should be like a roller coaster. The reader should feel emotion, fear, wonder, question. If the reader feels bored, chances are they're just going to close the book and never come back to it. You want to write a book, hand it to someone to read, and to see that look in their eye. Like they're reading. It's almost like they're on a roller coaster. You want your villain to be as bad as possible. You want to make your villain, in fact, you want to make your villain bigger and stronger and smarter with more resources than the protagonist. If your protagonist can outsmart the villain in the first chapter, there's no reason to read on. If the protagonist has more access to things that can help them stop the antagonist, there's no reason to read on. You want to give more resources and more power, more intelligence, more money to your villain. Because as Dan Brown says, it is the villain that sells the novel. If the villain is weak, then we have no reason to read on. But if we fear the villain, if we truly feel as though the villain can win, that is what's going to make us fear for the protagonist. That's going to make us want to turn the page. And as a writer, you want to increase those stakes and make them get higher and higher as the book goes on. Don't just have stakes at the beginning and then leave it 500 pages. Every 100 pages, you have to introduce something more that's going to scare the reader into asking what's going to happen next. Because the higher you raise those stakes, the more someone is going to want to read on. Make things difficult for your protagonist. Don't make it easy for them in any way. Make your villain evil, more powerful, and keep raising those stakes, and then watch what happens. Everyone who reads your novel is going to read it to the end, because they want to know how on earth this is going to end. How is the protagonist going to win? Keep raising the stakes. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my website. I'll leave a link for it in the description down below, where you can visit my website and you can check out all the blogs that I have that can help you become the greatest writer you can be. Because that's what I want to do. I want to help you get published as fast as possible. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out my next video on how you can write your own epic novel series, just like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. How can it be done? What do you need to know? Be sure to check out that video. In fact, I'm going to leave a link for that video right here, and you can click on it and watch it right now.